Sir, you're being arrested for trespassing on your own land. That's nearly what the officer said before I pulled out my property deed. See, one Karen had been making life miserable for everyone around Lake Serenity for months. She called the cops on anyone who dared exist without her blessing. She threatened me with a $50,000 lawsuit, filed bogus police reports, and even tried bribing county officials to force me off my own land. Here's the twist. She didn't even realize I was the owner of the $800,000 mansion she was renting. Picture the sunrise over Lake Serenity. Pine needles in the air, mist curling off the water. Then, suddenly, flashing blue lights cut through the morning haze as two squad cars crunch over gravel toward my grandfather's old cabin. And there she was, Brenda Carmichael, standing on the deck of her mansion, wrapped in a neon pink bathrobe, pointing me out like some wanted fugitive. Now, what would you do if someone called the police on you for fishing in your own backyard? Drop your answer below. And where are you tuning in from? I'd bet half of you have your own nightmare HOA stories. My name's Marcus. 3 years ago, I thought I'd found my slice of heaven. After 20 years working military logistics and a divorce that felt like being flattened by a tank driven by my ex-wife's attorney, I inherited my grandfather's lakeside cabin, Lake Serenity, Minnesota. Population, 3,200. The biggest scandal used to be Mrs. Henderson's cat swiping fish off neighbors' docks. The cabin itself wasn't grand. A 1960s A-frame on 2 acres of paradise. Each morning I woke to the call of loons across glassy water. I'd step onto a dock polished smooth by decades of weather and breathe in air so clean it erased 20 years of diesel fumes from the Army. The place smelled of cedar, pine, and that crisp metallic tang of lake water at dawn. For 2 perfect years, Lake Serenity lived up to its name. 47 properties dotted the shoreline, a mix of locals and summer families. We followed one simple code. Wave when you pass, help if someone's in trouble, and otherwise mind your own damn business. Then came Hurricane Brenda. She moved into the gaudiest house on the lake, an $800,000 McMansion that looked like a piece of Dallas suburbia had crash-landed in northern Minnesota. Within a week, she'd introduced herself to half the lake by pontoon boat, always in blindingly white capris and cardigans bright enough to guide aircraft. On the surface, she was sugar sweet. Behind her eyes, January ice. The morning it all shifted, I was sitting on my dock sipping coffee that tasted like liquid peace. Then I heard the rumble of an overpowered pontoon cutting through the calm like a chainsaw through silk. "Yoo-hoo! Good morning, neighbor," she called, her voice carrying across the water with all the warmth of a tax audit. She pulled up to my dock with a salesman's grin plastered on her face. "I'm Brenda Carmichael from the executive estate across the way." "Executive estate? Give me a break. I'm here on official HOA business," she announced, whipping out a manila folder with the flair of a game show host. "The Lake Serenity Homeowners Association has adopted new aesthetic standards, and I'm afraid your rustic setup doesn't meet community guidelines." I set my coffee down so hard it rang against the railing. "What homeowners association?" Her plastic smile cracked, showing teeth. "The one that protects our property values from declining influences. That aluminum boat needs to go, and frankly, the fishing gear scattered around here makes this place look like a bait shop exploded." Her so-called declining influence was my grandfather's fishing gear, hand-carved rod holders, an old tackle box older than her, and a 1995 aluminum boat that had caught more fish than her floating living room ever would. "Lady, this land's been in my family since before you were born. There's no HOA in my deed, and there never will be." That's when the mask slipped. Her voice dropped to ice cold. "We'll see about that, soldier boy." She revved her pontoon like she was making a getaway, her wake hitting my dock hard enough to spill my coffee. The stench of burning fuel and overpriced perfume hung in the air, mixing with clean pine until it made me sick, as her mansion caught. The sunrise, its windows glinting like predator's eyes, my old military instincts kicked in. This wasn't a petty neighbor squabble. This was war. And I had the sinking feeling I'd just been drafted. 3 days later, I found an envelope taped to my door like a parking ticket from hell. Inside was the most elaborate piece of fiction I'd seen since my divorce papers. Lake Serenity Homeowners Association violation notice, it read in blood-red letters on fancy letterhead. Apparently, I owed $500 for failing to meet dock aesthetic standards and had 30 days to pay or face fines and property liens. The document looked terrifyingly official. Seals, case numbers, legal jargon. Enough to scare most folks into cutting a check. Too bad it wasn't worth the paper it was printed on. Still, I knew better than to dismiss an enemy's bluff without recon. The county courthouse basement smelled like old leather and broken dreams, dust motes dancing in the fluorescent glow. Back in the Army, I'd learned the best intel comes from people who've been filing paperwork longer than you've been alive. That's how I met Dolores, a county clerk in her 70s. Another HOA victim, hun, she whispered, pulling out my property file with shaky hands. That Carmichael woman's been in here half a dozen times this month asking about enforcement and lien procedures. Between you and me, she doesn't know her ass from her elbow when it comes to property law. My deed was crystal clear. No covenants, no restrictions, no HOA. But my logistics training told me, never just look at the decoy. Always check what's happening in the background. Brenda's so-called Lake Serenity HOA did exist, technically. Incorporated 18 months earlier with just 12 members out of 47 properties. In legal terms, they had about as much power over my cabin as a neighbor's cat. But as I cross-checked ownership records, something set off alarms in my head. Several lakefront homes had recently been transferred into Carmichael Holdings, LLC. A quick online search revealed the truth. Our self-appointed HOA queen was running an illegal vacation rental racket, flipping quiet family cabins into party pads for city tourists. The irony was hard to ignore. The woman scolding me about community standards was the very one tearing them apart. That reminded me of something my grandfather used to say. Before you take on City Hall, make sure you know who really runs the city. The man was sharp. He also taught me that most county documents are public. Property deeds, business permits, covenant restrictions, all searchable online at no cost. You'd be surprised how much you can uncover by doing a little research instead of just tossing around threats. With that knowledge in hand, I decided to gauge the neighborhood mood with some strategic reconnaissance on social media. Say what you will about Facebook. It may be where brain cells go to retire, but it's also the place where you find out who's actually paying attention around town. My post was short and harmless. Has anyone else gotten violation notices from the Lake Serenity HOA? Asking for educational reasons? That post blew up faster than a fireworks factory. Within hours, 8 different residents reached out privately, each with their own nightmare story about Brenda. She had been making her way around the lake like some kind of legal intimidation storm, harassing elderly widows over bird feeders and lecturing young families about mailbox paint. Janet, a retired librarian with organizational superpowers that could put the CIA to shame, had been logging everything into a meticulous 3-ring binder. Tom, who ran the marina, shared photos of Brenda's bounce checks and unpaid fuel tabs. Even Florence, 90 years old and still sharp as a tack, reported late-night activity at Brenda's so-called family rentals. That's when I created a private group chat and dubbed it the Lake Serenity Truth Squad. Because if you're going to battle a tyrant, you might as well lean into the comic book drama of it. That night, my phone lit up with a number I didn't know. Brenda's voice came through the speaker, syrupy but sharp, like honey laced with industrial cleaner. "Marcus, sweetheart," she purred. "I saw your cute little Facebook post. You're making this much harder than it has to be." "Just asking questions, Brenda," I replied. Neighborly curiosity. Her voice dropped into that register women use when they're about to ruin your credit score. "Oh, darling, you don't want to go down this path with me. I have connections you can't imagine. And I will report you for harassment and cyberbullying." Click. Line dead. I stared at my phone, wondering what kind of connections a vacation rental scammer thought she had with local law enforcement. Later, I sat out on the dock, listening to the soft rhythm of water against the boards, the air still thick with the scent of freedom and fish fry. The sunset painted the lake in gold, the Truth Squad's houses glowing like watchtowers along the shore. Brenda had made a fatal miscalculation. She'd picked a fight with someone who actually understood intelligence gathering before entering a fight. If she thought Facebook drama would send me running, she clearly hadn't studied military veterans. Retreat isn't in our vocabulary. We adapt, improvise, and sure, sometimes spend half the night overthinking and mapping out 17 different battle plans. The next morning brought fresh entertainment. At 9 a.m., sharp, Tom Hendricks from County Code Enforcement pulled up in his pickup, looking as thrilled as a man heading into a root canal. Apparently, Brenda filed her bogus complaints on a strict schedule. "Mr. Marcus," he said, sheepish, "I need to follow up on reports about dock violations and an abandoned vehicle." The look on his face told me everything about the legitimacy of Brenda's claims. I poured him a cup of actual coffee, not the tar they serve in county offices, and we headed down to my supposedly illegal dock. After measuring twice and reviewing his clipboard, Tom shook his head like a man who knew his morning had been wasted. "Between you and me," he whispered, though no one was around, "this is the 23rd complaint I've gotten from the same address in 6 months. Lady's got us on speed dial." Then he let slip something telling. During their last meeting, Brenda had tried slipping him a $100 bill, calling it a consulting fee for finding creative ways to interpret building codes. She wasn't just pretending to be queen of the lake. She was testing the waters of low-level corruption. Granddad had another saying, "You learn a lot about people by how they treat service workers and government employees." Brenda's playbook was simple. Intimidate or buy them off. That evening, the Truth Squad attended Brenda's emergency HOA meeting, more theater than democracy. It was held in her mansion's great room. a space so aggressively decorated it looked like a furniture catalog had exploded in beige and gold. Only 6 people showed, mostly her rental managers, each wearing the expression of someone who'd rather be anywhere else. Brenda strutted through a PowerPoint called Protecting Our Community Investment, complete with pie charts on property values and photos of problem houses, which all belonged to folks who refused to join her HOA Janet. Bless her librarian instincts, took notes like she was archiving war crimes, but she also caught something more important. Brenda kept nervously checking a flashy Rolex and sneaking glances toward the kitchen. During the inevitable bathroom break, because nothing says professional meeting like a bathroom pause, in someone's living room, Janet trailed her and overheard a sharp phone conversation. "I told you the payments are coming," Brenda hissed. "These people are tougher than we thought, but I've got new plans. Legal pressure, code enforcement, whatever it takes." It all snapped into place. This wasn't about property values or community pride. Someone had Brenda by the throat, financially, and she was trying to squeeze cash out of her neighbors through intimidation. I'd seen the pattern in the military. Stress pushes people into reckless choices until they cross lines they swore they'd never cross. The real question was, who was holding Brenda's leash? The answer came sooner than I expected. Digging into her lawyer, the same one who'd sent me that threatening cease and desist, I found out he specialized in foreclosure defense and debt collection. Not exactly who you'd hire for squabbles over bird feeders. Unless, of course, you were already drowning in financial quicksand. I decided to do what any sensible person in my position would. I filed my own complaint against Brenda, harassment, false reports, and abusing county resources for her personal grudges. If she wanted to play the bureaucracy game, fine. I'd had years of experience with military red tape. But I didn't stop there. Using the property management company's contact details from her rental listings, I got in touch with the real owner of Brenda's so-called mansion. Let's just say Northwood Property Management was very eager to hear about their tenants' creative lease interpretations and unauthorized business dealings. Not long after, Deputy Rodriguez, who'd been monitoring the flood of complaints from our lake, pulled me aside after I submitted my counter-complaint. Leaning against his cruiser in the fading light that sparkled across the lake like shards of glass, he lowered his voice. "Off the record," he said. "We've been keeping tabs. Nothing technically criminal yet, but she's skirting the edge and we're watching." That evening, sitting on my dock, the lap of water against the shore mingled with the sound of laughter from a family barbecue across the lake. That's when it struck me. Brenda had miscalculated. She thought everyone here would fold under her pressure. Instead, she'd awakened a community that had kept to itself peacefully for decades, the smoke of charcoal and the murmur of honest. Conversation drifted through pine-scented air that still felt like home. Tomorrow would bring more skirmishes, but tonight the good guys were ahead. If Brenda thought calling in code enforcement was her nuclear strike, she clearly didn't realize. She hadn't seen true bureaucratic firepower yet. That moment arrived at 6:30 a.m. on a Thursday morning that began quietly and went sideways faster than a greased pig at the county fair. I was savoring my morning ritual, the first sacred sip of coffee that tricks you into thinking the world isn't completely mad, when the crunch of police tires on gravel shattered the calm. Blue lights pulsed against my cabin walls like some distorted northern lights, and I could practically feel Brenda's smug grin from across the water. 2 officers stepped out of their cruiser, wearing the expressions of mall cops stuck breaking up a senior citizen dance party. The younger one still had that eager, fresh-faced belief that every 911 call was urgent. His partner, a grizzled sergeant with weary eyes and stripes on his sleeve, clearly knew this was another taxpayer-funded waste of time. "Mr. Marcus," the veteran began, "we've had reports you trespassed on private property and made threats against a female resident. I invited them inside for coffee. If you're going to be accused of nonsense at dawn, you might as well keep things civilized." The sergeant, Peterson, according to his tag, took me up on the offer, probably because he knew department coffee tastes like despair mixed with budget cuts. "Sir, we're obligated to respond to every call," Peterson said, settling into my grandfather's old kitchen chair that creaked like a ship in a storm. "But between you and me, this one doesn't smell right." That's when I unveiled my secret. Arsenal, records, camera footage, property deeds, timelines of her harassment, and even a signed statement from Tom, the code enforcement officer she'd tried to bribe. The military had taught me one thing: paperwork wins wars. And this battle was about to become very one-sided. Peterson studied the footage of my supposed threatening behavior. What it actually showed was me helping elderly Florence load fishing gear into her car, while Brenda peered from her window like some second-rate spy novel villain. As for trespassing, it was on a public access road, public since before Brenda was even born, despite her shiny new private property, signs planted overnight like fake boundary markers. "Ma'am," Peterson muttered at the footage, shaking his head, "either you're the most polite terrorist alive, or someone's been pulling our leg." Right then, my phone rang. It was Dave Morrison, the private investigator I'd hired. He also worked at the local tackle shop and looked like he could wrestle a grizzly. His background check had wrapped up, and what he'd uncovered could have fueled a soap opera. Turns out, Brenda Carmichael owed $47,000 in unpaid HOA fees from her old neighborhood in Minneapolis. The irony was thick enough to slice and serve at the county fair. She'd been sued and lost, which explained her mastery of legal intimidation. She also owed money to contractors and credit card companies, using threats of lawsuits to stall. Until creditors gave up or settled cheap, and here's where it got good. Brenda's rental operation broke 3 zoning laws. She never filed for the licenses she needed. The county had 0 record of her business. She'd been running an illegal operation while lecturing everyone else about community rules. Meanwhile, the Truth Squad around the lake had grown to 15 neighbors, each with their own Brenda nightmare. Tom at the marina revealed she owed him $3,200 in dock fees and threatened to sue when he asked for payment. The hardware store owner showed security footage of her buying supplies, then disputing the charges with her credit card company, claiming defective goods she never returned. The pattern was as clear as a glassy lake. Brenda weaponized the law to dodge paying bills, counting on people to walk away rather than fight. After reviewing everything, Peterson shook his head like a man realizing he'd been chasing unicorns. Mr. Marcus, you should consider pressing charges for false reports. She's been using us like her personal enforcement squad. That ends today. As the patrol car rolled away, gravel crunching like the sound of victory, I noticed Brenda's shadow vanish from her mansion window. Mist rose from the lake, carrying a pine and the promise of change. My lawyer had scheduled a meeting for the next morning, saying he had news that could turn everything upside down. His tone told me Brenda's house of cards was about to collapse. The haunting calls of loons carried across the water, mingling with the ordinary sounds of decent people starting their day without lawsuits or bribes. Arthur Pettin, my grandfather's lawyer since the Carter era, was waiting. At 78, he still dressed as if every case was headed to the Supreme Court. His office smelled of leather and old cigars, with towers of law books ready to bury anyone careless enough to bump them. Marcus, better take a seat, Arthur said, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses that seemed old enough to have witnessed the Constitution signing. He spread documents across his desk like a gambler laying down a royal flush. Deeds, trust papers, and corporation documents. When your grandfather passed, you inherited more than the cabin, Arthur explained in that careful tone lawyers use, before dropping bombshells. In 1987, he created the Northwoods Property Trust. You hold a 60% controlling interest in 4 lakefront properties. My coffee froze halfway to my mouth. 4 properties, including the $800,000 mansion Brenda was living in. The realization hit like a wet fish slap. I'd been battling my own tenant. For 3 years, Brenda had been paying rent into an account I never knew existed. The same woman who tormented me over property standards had literally been putting money in my pocket each month. Arthur slid a lease across the desk, thick enough to stop a bullet. My grandfather had been thorough. The terms included quiet enjoyment of neighboring land, bans on unlicensed businesses, and obligations to uphold community peace. Brenda had broken about 14 separate clauses. How far behind is she on rent? I asked, though I already suspected. 2 months, plus late fees. The management company is preparing eviction proceedings, but they need trust approval. That's you. I stared at the documents, replaying 3 years of deposits I'd dismissed as some inheritance account. Suddenly, Brenda's desperate crusade made perfect sense. She wasn't just facing harassment claims and zoning issues. She was on the verge of losing the very base for her entire rental empire. Arthur, she doesn't realize I'm her landlord, does she? His lined face stretched into a grin sharp enough to win a courtroom photo op. Not unless she's far brighter than her recent antics suggest. The weight of the strategy hit me, like a battlefield revelation. I had the right to toss Brenda out immediately for breaking her lease, but that felt less like justice and more like exploiting a loophole. My grandfather always said, true strength comes from knowing when not to wield it. What would you do? I asked. Arthur leaned back, his chair groaning like an old ship in rough seas. Give her one last chance to set things right. Write everything down. Offer mediation. Show you tried the reasonable path. Judges respect landlords who take every diplomatic step before pressing the red button. But if she pushed further, Arthur tapped the eviction notice already waiting. On his desk. 30 days. Multiple violations. Neat, lawful, and financially catastrophic. I walked out of his office with the dizzying sense that I'd been playing checkers while the rest of the world was playing chess. The afternoon sun drenched Main Street in gold, and for the first time in months, it felt like the universe might actually have a sense of humor. Brenda Carmichael, the HOA tyrant and self-proclaimed vacation rental mogul, had been paying her, sworn enemy for the privilege of wrecking his peace and quiet. Sometimes the sweetest revenge is realizing you've been holding the winning hand all along. It was the same sensation you get when you discover you've been building IKEA furniture. With the instructions upside down for hours, only instead of ending up with a crooked bookshelf, I'd stumbled into being my nemesis's landlord. Now it was time to construct a case that would make Perry Mason green with envy. Arthur became my general, distilling decades of courtroom cunning into what he called the nuclear option playbook. His office morphed into mission control, manila folders spreading like ivy across every available surface. The man had been filing cases since the Nixon years and approached this one with the precision of a Swiss craftsman. Think of landlord-tenant law like football, Arthur explained, tapping his Mont Blanc against a yellow pad. You set the rules, players follow them, or they're permanently benched. No emotions, just consequences for the record. Dave Morrison, my private investigator, who could probably track a ghost through a blizzard, delivered his final report with the look of a prospector who'd just hit a rich vein. Brenda was drowning in $73,000 of debt, facing tax liens on a Minnesota property, and carrying a credit score uglier than a subprime mortgage pitch. Here's something your audience should know, Dave said, sliding the file across Arthur's desk. Most counties let you pull property liens, judgments, and tax issues online. Costs nothing but time. Knowledge is leverage. Meanwhile, Janet, a retired librarian turned intelligence analyst, organized our community's documentation with a rigor that would put the Pentagon to shame. Her massive binder contained time-stamped photos, witness statements, and a cross-referenced index of Brenda's harassment tactics that read like a criminal psych case study. The marina owner gave me receipts for unpaid bills and bounced checks, Janet reported, pushing up glasses that had seen more neighborhood drama than any soap opera writer could imagine. Local contractors told the same tale, jobs left unpaid, threats of lawsuits. Deputy Rodriguez, who tracked complaint patterns with the patience of a bloodhound on bacon grease, offered advice that straddled policy and friendly counsel. Document everything, he stressed, leaning on Arthur's filing cabinet. Courts want proof that reasonable people tried reasonable solutions before things went nuclear. The prep felt like a military campaign, if military campaigns involved librarians and small-town lawyers plotting the collapse of a vacation rental empire. I even added new security cameras with audio, turning my property into a surveillance zone rivaling a federal courthouse. You can legally record audio on your own property in most states, Arthur noted, thumbing through a statute book thick, enough to stop a bullet. Always check your local laws, but documented evidence beats he said, she said every time. Arthur then unveiled what he called our escalation protocol, a step-by-step plan that would give Brenda every chance to save face while meticulously logging her refusal to act like a decent human. Step 1. Approach her as a concerned neighbor, offering county mediation. If she refused, or made things worse, we'd reveal the landlord twist publicly at the next town council meeting. Janet prepped like she was heading to a Senate hearing, studying Robert's Rules of Order while Arthur drafted legal templates. For every contingency, right down to zoning enforcement and criminal charges for false police reports, the man had backup plans for his backup plans. Always give people a way to retreat with dignity, Arthur said, stacking documents with monk-like care. Judges like parties who attempted peace, juries despise bullies who reject it. Our Truth Squad had evolved into a neighborhood watch program that would make the NSA jealous. 15 Lake residents coordinated via group chat, tracking Brenda's escalating antics. Tom at the marina pledged to log every future outburst, while local businesses offered to add their own records to the growing paper trail. We even prepped media contacts in case things went public. The local newspaper editor was already curious, having heard whispers about shady zoning deals and possible bribes. It all felt like the plot of a heartwarming movie, except with more affidavits and fewer musical numbers. Elderly neighbors installed cameras after Brenda's intimidation visits, and Truth Squad volunteers began escorting vulnerable residents on errands to prevent cornered confrontations. That evening, sitting in Arthur's office, surrounded by evidence, folders, the musty scent of law books blending with Janet's cookies and Dave's cigar smoke, I realized we had built something remarkable, a community that refused to be bullied. Tomorrow, I'd give Brenda one last chance to choose dignity over disaster. After that, the nuclear option was ready. If she thought my growing army of neighbors was just harmless small talk, she clearly hadn't noticed the tactical net closing in. What happened next only proved one thing. Desperate people make catastrophically stupid choices, especially when they're cornered like rabid raccoons in designer cardigans. The sabotage started subtly, which should have been my first warning that Brenda had graduated from amateur hour harassment to genuine criminal behavior. She'd been monitoring our Truth Squad activities through Facebook stalking that would make a teenage ex-girlfriend proud, creating fake profiles to gather intelligence and spread counter-narratives about my supposed instability. Tuesday night, my security cameras caught something that made my military paranoia look like casual concern. At 2:17 a.m., a pickup truck matching her handyman's vehicle crept past my dock like a suburban ninja mission gone wrong. The driver wore a baseball cap pulled low, but the truck's license plate was clearly visible under my new LED floodlights. Wednesday morning brought a surprise that would have ruined my day if I hadn't learned to expect the worst from people wearing too much perfume and carrying legal threats. My fishing boat was sitting half submerged at the dock, looking like a maritime crime scene. The drain plug had been removed with surgical precision. Not loose, not damaged, just gone. $2,800 in water damage to the motor and electronics, plus tackle gear that had been in my family longer than Brenda had been alive. The smell of lake water mixed with oil and gasoline created an aromatic cocktail that screamed insurance claim and criminal charges. But here's where Brenda's desperation revealed her fundamental misunderstanding of how evidence works in the 21st century. My security camera shad captured everything in glorious, high-def detail, complete with audio of her handyman muttering about crazy lady jobs while he worked. I filed the polish report with the methodical precision of someone who'd been documenting harassment for months. Sheriff's Deputy Rodriguez arrived within an hour, took one look at the video evidence, and shook his head like a man watching taxpayer money circle the drain. This crossed a line, Rodriguez said, examining the deliberately removed drain plug. Property. Damage is a felony if it exceeds $1,000, and your electronics alone put this in serious criminal territory. While I was dealing with insurance adjusters and marine mechanics, Brenda was apparently having her own version of a nervous breakdown across the lake. Truth Squad members reported increasingly erratic behavior that made her previous harassment look like polite conversation. She'd started approaching elderly neighbors with the subtlety of a door-to-door cult recruiter, demanding they choose sides in what she called the lake war. Florence, bless her 90-year-old heart, told Brenda exactly where she could stick her loyalty. Demands, using language that would make a sailor blush and a Sunday school teacher take notes. Tom at the marina finally banned. Brenda from the fuel dock after she screamed at a teenage employee about conspiracy pricing and discrimination against successful businesswomen. The kid was pulling in $8 an hour and probably couldn't even spell conspiracy, let alone mastermind one against the self-proclaimed queens of vacation rentals. Yet within a single day, the grocery store fiasco had already achieved the status of local folklore. Brenda had detonated at the checkout lane, accusing the cashier of padding her bill and demanding that corporate headquarters address what she claimed was a campaign of harassment targeting professional women. The manager, an endlessly patient woman used to handling everything from counterfeit coupons to holiday shopping meltdowns, finally asked Brenda to leave when she started filming other shoppers while ranting about witnesses to discrimination. But the real jackpot came from Janet's knack for research at the library. She dug up Brenda's housing history from the last 8 years, and the pattern was unmistakable. Every single address followed the same script. Disputes with neighbors, harassment complaints, accusations of dangerous behavior whenever anyone stood up to her, and an eventual exit that suggested heavy legal pressure. Former landlords described identical situations that ended in eviction. One Minneapolis property manager even had records of a restraining order after Brenda threatened a neighbor who had reported her underground dog breeding setup. Another apartment complex had security footage showing her scratching up residents' cars after they filed noise complaints. Meanwhile, I was tightening my quiet preparations like a general staging for D-Day. Arthur filed a restraining order that cataloged the harassment and property damage. We looped in the insurance investigator about possible fraud. Since Brenda's handyman suddenly couldn't remember his suspicious late-night marina visits, pressure was mounting from every direction. Online reviews for Brenda's rentals began mentioning unstable management and neighborhood conflicts, sending her booking numbers crashing faster than her credit score. The property management company received official complaints about tenant conduct that violated community rules. County zoning launched a formal investigation into unlicensed operations. Even local reporters started digging into her harassment, patterns, and corruption rumors. That evening, sitting on my freshly repaired dock, listening to waves slap against the new bumpers and breathing in the sharp scent of pine mixed with victory, I realized Brenda had made a fatal mistake. She had converted criminal behavior into documented evidence, a death sentence in court. When people run out of lawful options, they usually pick one of two routes: bow out with some dignity, or double down on foolishness until they become infamous. Brenda, of course, dove headfirst into option 2 with the zeal of a kamikaze pilot aiming for a carrier. What followed would have been funny if it weren't so pathetically criminal. Cedar Falls County Commissioner Bill Hayes had served for 12 years without a single ethics blemish, which meant Brenda's offer was about as welcome as a tornado during Sunday service. According to Hayes' later testimony, Brenda waltzed into his office one Tuesday, designer purse swinging, radiating that brand of arrogance that comes from overdosing on your own entitlement. "Commissioner Hayes, I have a business opportunity for you," she declared, sliding an envelope across his desk like she was brokering state secrets instead. of trying to bribe a small-town official who probably made less than her shoe budget. Inside was $5,000 in cash. Payment, she explained, for consulting services regarding the so-called environmental hazard posed by my grandfather's lakeside cabin. She even made air quotes while suggesting it should be condemned for polluting the water. Hayes had been in politics long enough to smell corruption a mile away. He immediately reported the attempted bribe to the district attorney, sparking an investigation that made Watergate look like a parking dispute. But Brenda didn't stop there. She went door to door around town like some corrupt sales rep, offering shady deals. She pitched similar donations to the zoning inspector and even tried slipping money to a sheriff's deputy, calling it a community safety contribution, in exchange for overlooking her business license violations. Carl, the zoning inspector, was a by-the-book type who treated building codes like scripture. By their second meeting, he was wearing a wire. The recording was so crisp, you could hear Brenda's jewelry clink as she counted bills while insisting Marcus, the so-called dangerous veteran, needed to be removed for the neighborhood's safety. Deputy Rodriguez filed a formal report of her bribe attempt that could have doubled as a textbook example of how not to approach law enforcement. Brenda had managed to escalate a neighborhood squabble into a criminal case faster than you could say conspiracy to commit corruption. When Arthur called with news about the DA's investigation, his voice carried that distinct lawyer's cadence, the one they use when they're pleased but trying not to sound smug. Marcus, she's looking at real prison time, he said. Bribing public officials is a felony with teeth. I wasn't prepared for the conflict that followed. My training had taught me to seek justice, not to witness someone's life collapse in real time. But Brenda had crossed into territory where neighborly disputes became criminal, and there was no way to shove that toothpaste back into the tube. The local newspaper editor, who'd been following the case with bloodhound persistence, reached out. This has grown past neighborhood drama, she explained. Corruption allegations are newsworthy, and the public deserves to know. That media attention pushed Brenda into her final, spectacular public breakdown. This one at the boat launch, in front of 27 bystanders who thought they were just there, to put fishing boats in the water, not to witness a soap opera. It's all a conspiracy, Brenda shrieked, jabbing a finger at me with enough venom to knock out small wildlife. He's been harassing me and following me for months. I demand that he cover my legal bills and moving costs. The claim was so absurd that several onlookers burst out laughing. Florence, who had been calmly loading fishing gear with the patience of someone who had already outlived 3 husbands and 2 presidents, finally spoke up with the kind of authority only time can earn. Well, sweetheart, I've been living on this lake for 6 decades, and the problem isn't him, it's you. That boy hasn't done anything but fish and keep to himself, while you've been running around threatening lawsuits like some kind of legal bully. The crowd nodded in agreement, like a Greek chorus powered by common sense. Phones appeared in people's hands as they began recording what was clearly about to become viral gold. Realizing she'd lost whatever support she had, Brenda stormed off, vowing to hire real lawyers, with money everyone knew she didn't have. That evening, Arthur suggested I go public about being Brenda's landlord at the upcoming town council meeting. It's time to put a stop to this before she causes real harm to herself or anyone else, he said, neatly organizing papers with the precision of a man plotting a courtroom triumph. Her criminal stunts have forced your hand. Word spread across town faster than gossip at Sunday potluck. The county attorney announced he would attend to observe possible testimony, while the regional newspaper sent a reporter after catching wind of small-town corruption rumors. That night, as I sat on my dock listening to loons echo across starlit water, I realized Brenda had accidentally handed me something I never thought I'd get, the moral high ground in a community that refused to be bullied. Tomorrow, the truth would finally come out. Maybe not in a courthouse, but in the high school gymnasium. If you've never seen 300 small-town residents cram into a gym for what was supposed to be a routine council meeting, you're missing one of democracy's greatest live shows. The atmosphere felt like a state championship game crossed with a public execution. Only the popcorn was homemade and the drama was 100% real. Local shops even closed early so owners could attend what folks were calling the Great Lakes Showdown. A regional TV crew set up cameras like it was a presidential debate, while county officials filled the back row, wearing the grim expressions of people ready to watch accountability finally land. Brenda arrived fashionably late, flanked by a flashy Twin Cities lawyer in a $1,000 suit, the kind of guy who probably billed more per hour than most people made in a week. She had dressed for war, showing up in a stark white power suit that screamed, "I matter," though her twitchy energy betrayed the fact that she knew the walls were closing in faster than her unpaid credit cards. I walked to the podium calmer than I'd felt in months, holding a manila folder fat enough to sink a battleship. The gym went silent, save for the buzz of fluorescent lights and the faint growl of someone's empty stomach. Apparently, democracy works up an appetite. Thank you all for being here tonight, I began, scanning the familiar faces I'd come to know as neighbors. 3 months ago, I believed this was just a simple dispute between neighbors. Tonight, I need to show you what I've actually uncovered. Arthur's presentation could have made corporate executives jealous. Property records appeared on the big pull-down screen, projected in letters large enough to read from the parking lot. The crowd gasped in unison, the sound of 300 people collectively realizing they'd just seen a magic trick revealed in reverse. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, "I have unknowingly been Brenda Carmichael's landlord for the past 3 years." The place exploded like a stadium after a last-second game winner. Applause, laughter, and shouts of "I knew it!" echoed off the basketball hoops while Brenda's face shifted colors faster than a mood ring in a microwave. Arthur's timeline of lease violations rolled like a greatest hits album of tenant nightmares. Security footage of her tampering with boats drew actual boos from the crowd, while audio clips of attempted bribes made the county attorney sit straighter, jotting notes that looked suspiciously like the early draft of arrest warrants. Brenda's attorney tried to spin it with the desperation of a man plugging a dam with chewing gum. My client was unaware of the ownership structure and acted in good faith to preserve community values, he insisted. The audience's laughter was so thunderous it probably rattled seismographs in the next county. From the front row, Florence leaned forward, her voice cutting through the noise with the confidence of a woman who had earned the right to call things as they were. "Good faith, my ass." The noise grew so intense the pastor shielded his ears while the newspaper reporter's pen raced across the page. Financial records rolled across the projector, unpaid bills, shady business dealings, like a crime manual disguised as a spreadsheet. Local shop owners spoke freely about Brenda's imaginative ways of dodging payments, while Tom from the marina raised a stack of bounced checks as if presenting evidence in open court. That's when I finally dropped the line I'd rehearsed. In my bathroom mirror for 3 straight days, "Miss Carmichael, I treated you with neighborly respect and offered reasonable dialogue as a fellow community member. Instead, you chose intimidation, harassment, and outright criminal behavior. I lifted the eviction notice, crisp, official, devastating. As your landlord, you are hereby given 30 days to vacate for multiple lease violations. This could have been handled quietly and civilly." The room erupted. Applause thundered so long I half expected the fire marshal to issue a citation. Florence led the clapping like a maestro, conducting the loudest orchestra in town, while several Truth Squad members dabbed at tears that might have been relief, or joy, or both. Brenda sprang to her feet with the flair of someone who had clearly practiced courtroom theatrics in her own mirror. "This is all lies and conspiracy," she shouted, her finger stabbing the air at me, sharp enough to poison. "A lake. He's bribed the police and the press. This is harassment. Discrimination." Deputy Rodriguez stepped closer as Brenda's voice climbed above any acceptable indoor volume. Her attorney physically held her back from storming the podium, likely sparing her fresh charges for public disturbance or worse. Afterward, the TV reporter lobbed me gentle questions, softballs tossed by a grandmother. "What message do you want to share with others facing HOA abuse?" I answered simply, "Document everything, know your rights, and remember, bullies only win if good people stay silent." The next morning's headline read, "Lake Dispute Uncovers Bribery Scheme." Overnight, our neighborhood drama transformed into a cautionary tale of corruption, power, and why you should always read the fine print on your property deeds. As the crowd filtered out that night, buzzing like teenagers after a concert, I realized something had shifted. We'd created a community unwilling to be silenced. No matter how loudly someone screamed about their supposed importance, Brenda disappeared from Lake Serenity faster than a rubber check clears. Within 2 weeks, she crammed her designer bags and bruised pride into a U-Haul bound for Florida. She left behind a forwarding address doomed to expire in months and a rental home wrecked like a frat house after spring break. The criminal case wrapped quickly, small-town style. Brenda pled out, probation and 200 hours of community service, an ironic sentence for someone who spent months tormenting her own neighbors. Her high-priced lawyer probably billed more for the plea deal than most folks earn in a year. But at least justice came with financial sting attached. I never set out to be Cedar Falls' reluctant community organizer, but apparently fighting. For fishing rights qualifies you for leadership you never asked for. Our Truth Squad naturally evolved into the Lake Serenity Advisory Committee, a body that set fair community standards without the authoritarian baggage of a typical HOA. We partnered with county environmental offices to protect the lake, launched a neighborhood watch focused on real crime instead of bird feeders, and even created mediation services to resolve disputes without lawyers or cops. The true breakthrough came when I figured out what to do with 3 years' worth of unexpected rental income. Thus, the Lake Serenity Community Scholarship Fund was born. The idea was radical in its simplicity. Reward local kids who strengthen their community, not tear it down. Every spring, scholarships go to students pursuing careers in environmental, science, law, or public service. Our annual fundraiser has become Cedar Falls' social highlight. fish fry so good it feels holy, live bluegrass, and storytelling contests where neighbors recount Brenda tales like survivors swapping stories of natural disasters. Last year, Florence stole the show with her dramatic reenactment of telling Brenda exactly where to shove her loyalty demands, a performance so colorful it made firefighters blush and inspired a minister's sermon on righteous anger as divine justice. Personal healing came like spring in Minnesota, slow at first, then all at once. Peace arrived, carrying unexpected blessings. Friendships forged in the fires of resistance, neighbors who proved they would stand shoulder to shoulder when bullies tried to divide them. Janet and I started dating around Christmas, bonded by our mutual appreciation for airtight documentation and her uncanny skill at organizing neighborhood uprisings. Turns out librarians make exceptional partners, especially when they're not busy toppling rental empires with superior research tactics. I rediscovered my grandfather's woodworking shop, building picnic tables for the lake and teaching local kids how to make things with their hands instead of lawsuits. There's deep satisfaction in creating beauty from raw lumber, especially after months of dealing with people who spun chaos from pure entitlement. Our conservation project grew into a statewide model. Weekend cleanups cleared invasive species, while grade schoolers tested water samples and learned that safeguarding nature requires teamwork, not litigation. Today, state agencies hold up Lake Serenity as proof of what's possible when communities stand together. 3 lessons every homeowner should remember. Always check deed restrictions before buying. Most HOA rules are unenforceable fantasies written by self-proclaimed experts with Google law degrees. Public records are free gold mines, liens, judgments, business licenses. Knowledge always beats intimidation. Security cameras and documentation neutralize harassment better than any lawyer. Invest in good gear and know your local recording. Laws. Media attention turned our little neighborhood saga into fuel for other communities pushing back against HOA tyranny. I've been on property rights podcasts, spoken at town meetings, and somehow became a voice for people refusing to bow to petty bureaucrats. Just last week, Janet mentioned her sister's fight with predatory towing companies in Duluth. Same. Intimidation playbook, she said, sliding over her notes and tripping my finely tuned bully radar. Interesting, I replied, savoring coffee that tasted like victory. Dave Morrison's investigative services are still open for business. This morning, as the sunrise painted Lake Serenity gold and loons echoed across still waters, I heard my grandfather's words drifting back. Sometimes standing up for yourself means standing up for everyone. The scent of pine and fresh coffee blended with the promise of another day in a community that had learned to push back against those who mistake power for permission to abuse. If you've endured your own HOA nightmare, drop your story in the comments below. Together, we can help others fight and win. And if you enjoyed watching Justice Slam Entitlement with a satisfying dose of poetic karma, hit subscribe and ring the bell for more HOA tales, where everyday people put neighborhood tyrants in their place. If this story made you cheer or cringe, give it a like, leave your thoughts, and stick around for the next outrageous HOA showdown.